In December of the year 1900, 3 men were stationed on the island of Eilean Mor, and on December 7th, they sent their final signal to the outside world. Then, darkness fell, and the lighthouse was never lit again. For 19 days, there was no sign, no trace, until Joseph Moore, the relief keeper, set foot on the island. What he found was more terrifying than silence.
The scenes you just watched were excerpts from the trailer of a PC game called Eilean Mor, The Lost Keepers. But some real events can be far darker and more terrifying than any game or movie. The story I'm about to tell now is based on a mystery that shook all of Scotland in 1900 and remains unexplained to this day. So, what happened to the keepers? Were they dragged into the sea by a giant marine creature, or abducted by aliens, or had something entirely different? Principal Keeper James Ducat was 43 years old before the great incident. He was an experienced lighthouse keeper who had served for many years. He began his career at various lighthouses and held similar positions before starting his duty at the Eilean Mor Lighthouse. He left behind his wife, Mary, and 4 children, aged 16, 13, 9, and 6. Donald MacArthur was 40 years old, married, and had 2 children. He had maritime experience, but not as many years of service as the other 2 keepers. He was a friend of Principal Keeper Ducat. He generally played a supporting role, lightening the workload and carrying less responsibility. Assistant Keeper Thomas Marshall was in his 30s. He was unmarried, but had an elderly father, 1 brother, and 1 sister. Thomas Marshall was serving as the first assistant keeper at the Flannan Lighthouse. On April 27, 1896, at about the age of 27, he joined the NLB, Northern Lighthouse Board, and began his career as a lighthouse keeper. Records show that before working at the lighthouse, he had served as a sailor and also gained experience as an occasional keeper at the Ailsa Craig Lighthouse. At the time of the incident, Marshall was a young keeper in his early 30s with about 4 years of lighthouse service. Eyewitness accounts and local stories described Marshall as a physically large man, but gentle and agreeable in nature, often referred to as a gentle giant. The most intriguing detail about Thomas was his diary, found at the lighthouse. According to his entry dated December 12th, "The strongest wind I have seen in 20 years. Principal Keeper James Ducat has been very quiet. Third Assistant MacArthur is crying." On December 13th, his second entry read, "Wind still strong. Sea raging. We can feel God's wrath. Ducat is praying. MacArthur is shouting." The most curious part here was MacArthur crying and Ducat praying out of fear. This is striking because Principal Keeper Ducat, at the time about 43 to 44 years old, was an experienced senior keeper. On November 21st, 1878, at just 22 years old, he joined the Northern Lighthouse Board, NLB, and served at various Scottish lighthouses, including Montrose Ness, Inchkeith, Rins of Islay, and Langness. He spent an especially long period, 7 years and 9 months, at the Rins of Islay Lighthouse before, according to NLB records, being promoted to Principal Keeper in May 1896. After this promotion, he served as Principal Keeper at the Loch Ryan Lighthouse, and in 1899 he was appointed as the first Principal Keeper of the newly operational Flannan Isles Eilean Mor Lighthouse. Records about Ducat's personal life show that he was deeply embedded in the lighthouse community. In fact, his wife's family also came from an experienced lineage of lighthouse keepers who had served at various Scottish lighthouses. So, what could have happened to frighten a man like Ducat, who had spent decades at sea, so much that he prayed in fear? If the issue was a storm, Ducat had already experienced many storms in his life. The most interesting part is that official records from that time make no mention of a storm, meaning the storm the keepers claimed they were battling in fear never actually happened. So why did the keepers say they were facing a violent storm? What really happened to them? Let's now try to recount the events in chronological order. December 7th, 1900. The Flannan Isles Lighthouse was last seen operating normally on this date by nearby observers. Roderick Mackenzie, tasked with monitoring Eilean Mor from approximately 18 miles away, reported seeing the light on the evening of December 7th. However, from the nights of December 8th to 11th, the lighthouse light could not be distinguished from the mainland due to weather condition. On the night of December 12th, when the skies cleared, the light was visible again, but from December 15th onward, the lighthouse was no longer observed for an extended period. December 15th, 1900, night. The steamer SS Arctur, en route from Philadelphia to Leith, Scotland, detected that the Flannan light was not lit. A note stating "lighthouse not operational" was entered into the ship's log. At that time, weather conditions in the area were beginning to deteriorate. December 18th, 1900. Upon arrival at Leith Harbour, the Arctur's captain reported the lighthouse outage to the Northern Lighthouse Board in Edinburgh. However, there were delays in this warning reaching the relevant authorities. The matter was only given serious attention when the time for the routine shift change was approaching. December 20th, 1900. The keeper's normal 2-week shift at the Flannan Isles had expired, and the lighthouse supply and relief vessel Hesperus was scheduled to reach the island on this date. However, due to severe storms and poor weather, Hesperus could not approach the island, and the trip was postponed. December 26, 1900. After delays caused by adverse weather, the Hesperus finally reached the shores of Eilean Mor around midday. Captain James Harvey, Jim Harvey, of the vessel repeatedly sounded the ship's whistle and fired a signal flare to announce their arrival. There was no response. Normally, when the supply ship appeared, the keepers would raise a flag on the flagpole and lower the provisions crates to the shore as part of the welcome preparation. This time, however, the flagpole was bare. There were no crates on the jetty, and no one had come down to meet them. Faced with this unusual situation, Captain Harvey began to grow concerned. That afternoon, Hesperus's volunteer relief keeper, Joseph Moore, was sent alone in a small boat to investigate. Moore climbed the 160-step staircase carved into the rock leading up from the landing to the lighthouse compound. The outer gate to the facility was closed, as was the main entrance to the building. Upon entering, he was met by an eerie silence. The beds were left in a disheveled state, as if the men had risen in haste, and all the clocks in the lighthouse had stopped at 9 o'clock. That night, after his crew's inspection of the island, Captain Harvey concluded that the keepers had likely fallen victim to an accident. He immediately sent a telegram to the NLB commissioners in Edinburgh, which read, "A dreadful accident has happened at Flannan. The 3 keepers, Ducat, Marshall, and the Occasional, have disappeared from the island. The clocks have stopped, and other signs indicate that the accident occurred about a week ago. Poor fellows. They must have been blown over the cliffs or drowned while trying to secure the crane." Captain Harvey's urgent report was the first document to suggest that the incident had occurred around December 15th, with the keepers most likely swept into the sea and drowned. This was a preliminary assumption based on what seemed a plausible explanation at the time. However, there was no evidence of drowning or being swept away. Had 3 men truly drowned, at least one body should have washed ashore. The surrounding area and mainland were searched for weeks, yet not a single personal belonging was ever found. Calling it drowning was, therefore, an evidence-free assumption. We will examine this theory and others shortly. December 27th to 28th, 1900. Joseph Moore and 3 volunteer seamen, MacDonald, Lamont, and Campbell, were left on the island to operate the lighthouse, while Hesperus returned to the Isle of Lewis to deliver the news. For Moore, the hardest nights of his life were about to begin. Alone on a desolate island, running the light where his fellow keepers had vanished under mysterious circumstances. December 29th, 1900. NLB Area Superintendent Robert Muirhead arrived at Flannan Isle to begin the official investigation. Having personally hired the 3 missing keepers, Muirhead knew them all well and was aware of their level of experience. He spent several days conducting a detailed examination of the site. January 8th, 1901. Robert Muirhead submitted his official report to the Commission in Edinburgh. The report included his findings and conclusions on the probable fate of the keepers. The incident was officially recorded in Scottish records as the deaths of the 3 keepers on December 15, 1900, probably by drowning. and entered as such in the Carloway District Death Register. In reality, however, no definitive evidence or trace was ever found to prove exactly what happened to the three men. So, what could really have happened to the keepers? Let us now examine the theories. The drowning theory. According to this theory, the keepers drowned at sea. As I mentioned earlier, there was no evidence of drowning or being swept away. Had three men truly drowned, at least one body should have washed ashore. The Flannan Isles and the nearby mainland were searched for weeks, yet not a single personal belonging was found. For this reason, saying they drowned was an unsubstantiated assumption. Outside the lighthouse buildings, there was no sign of the keepers anywhere on the island. No bodies, no life jacket. It was as if the three men had simply vanished into thin air. Moreover, under the rules of the Northern Lighthouse Board, NLB, one person was always required to remain inside on watch. This means that at most, two men could have been outside working. For all three to be outside at the same time would have been a violation of protocol. If one man had suffered an accident outside, it seems unlikely that the others would have been swept away at exactly the same moment. It was noted that one set of oilskins, waterproof outerwear, belonging to one of the keepers was still hanging up, while the other two keepers' outdoor clothing was missing. This suggests that one of them, most likely Donald MacArthur, had gone outside in a hurry, without his oilskin. In cold, rainy weather, no keeper on duty would normally go outside without such protection. Venturing out without it in strong winds and cold would have been both illogical and uncharacteristic for a professional. There was no note inside indicating an emergency, nor was any signal for help left outside. If one man had gone missing, the others would have called for help, sent a light signal, or left a note. This supports the idea of a disappearance that was sudden, silent, and left no trace. The keepers fought. One theory suggests that a fight broke out among the keepers, leading one to kill the others before taking his own life. Some speculation has claimed the incident could have been the result of a human conflict. Given Donald MacArthur's reputedly short-tempered and combative personality, it has been suggested that stress and isolation among three men alone on the island could have triggered a violent altercation. According to this scenario, the argument or fight spilled over toward the dangerous cliff edge, and during the struggle, all three lost their balance and fell into the sea. In one version, MacArthur became angry and attacked one of his colleagues. The other intervened. The fight escalated, and they all went over the cliff. However, no concrete evidence supports this theory. The order inside the lighthouse and signs that the keepers had been working together up until the last moment indicate cooperation rather than conflict. As such, the fight-murder theory remains mostly gossip and character-based speculation. Pirate attack. Another theory proposes that a group of sailors or a ship arrived, forcibly taking the keepers or killing them. In the early 1900s, British newspapers even speculated about enemy spy ships landing on the island to abduct the keepers. Given the era's climate of military espionage fears, the foreign agents removed the keepers theory found some space in the press. However, there was no sign of a struggle on the island, and no evidence that the keepers had been taken by force. Additionally, the island's conditions made a covert attack extremely difficult. For these reasons, such ideas were not taken seriously. Did the keepers flee? Among the more unusual ideas regarding the fate of the missing keepers is the suggestion that the three men left the island of their own accord. Some claims suggested the keepers had arranged for a ship to take them away, abandoning their post to start a new life. However, the fact that they left behind their families, belongings, and uncollected wages makes this theory highly unrealistic. Did a giant sea creature attack the keepers? As the mystery deepened, supernatural explanations began to find a place in popular culture and folktales. In the early 1900s, some newspapers and magazines headlined bizarre claims that a sea monster had swallowed the men to explain the complete lack of physical evidence. According to this theory, in December 1900, an unidentified and enormous sea creature was roaming the wild Atlantic waters around the Flannan Isles. This creature could have been an unknown species of giant octopus, squid, eel, sea serpent, or, according to some, even a Loch Ness-type creature, like Nessie. For unknown reasons, the creature approached the island and either directly attacked the keepers, pulling them into the water, caused sudden panic, leading the keepers to fall into the sea and drown? Or was a supernatural being guided by occult forces that took them without leaving a trace? In the 19th and early 20th centuries, many sea monster legends circulated among Atlantic coastal communities. The kraken, giant octopus, or squid-like creatures of Scandinavian lore, were said to wrap around ships and drag them under. In the 1800s, many sailors claimed to have seen giant, serpent-like creatures in the ocean. And of course, Nessie, the Loch Ness Monster, was included among the suspects. Although said to inhabit a loch in mainland Scotland, some speculated that this creature could have reached the open ocean. The complete absence of physical evidence made ordinary explanations seem insufficient, so such theories were perhaps inevitable. The fact that around 80% of the Atlantic Ocean remains unexplored even today adds an extra layer of mystery in support of the idea. Those who believe this theory connect the events as follows. On December 15th, the keepers went outside because something had caught their attention. They saw something massive in the water, perhaps a large object or movement unlike any wave. Out of curiosity or panic, they approached. Perhaps MacArthur ran out from inside. The creature either attacked directly or created chaos that swept them into the sea. The absence of bodies or belongings shows the creature destroyed or carried off its victim completely. The deep water channels and rocky geos near the lighthouse would have been perfect hiding spots for giant creatures. Were they abducted by aliens? Alien abduction theories surrounding the disappearance of the Eilean Mor, Flannan Isles keepers gained popularity, especially in the second half of the 20th century, as public fascination with UFOs grew. This theory uses the trace-free disappearance and the bodies never found aspect as evidence of extraterrestrial involvement. According to this theory, the three keepers were abducted by a UFO around December 15, 1900. The UFO either passed over the island or appeared above the sea while the keepers were working outside. A powerful beam of light lifted them off the ground. This explains the absence of struggle marks, bodies, or personal belongings. Donald MacArthur, whose oilskins remained inside, is thought to have run outside in panic after seeing the light. UFOs are not only seen in the air, but also under the sea. These are called USOs, unidentified submerged objects. In this version, the lights reported around the Flannan Isles were actually a craft emerging from or entering the sea. The keepers, curious about the strange light or object, went down to the west landing. Before the craft submerged, it took them aboard. The craft's disappearance into the deep ocean would explain why no bodies were ever found. There is also a more conspiratorial version of the alien theory. In the early 1900s, the British Royal Navy was testing experimental airships, blimp type, or new submarines. During these tests, there was contact with extraterrestrial beings. Flannan Isle was used as an experimental landing or contact point. When the keepers witnessed the event, they were removed, either by the aliens themselves or, for secrecy, by human authorities. And now, we come to the final theory. Could it have been a paranormal case? Some newspapers and magazines have attributed the lack of any physical trace to paranormal causes. According to ancient Scottish folk tales, mystical beliefs, and occult legends, the Flannan Isles are haunted by an ancient curse or supernatural presence. This entity is said to be a manifestation of a group of spiritual beings, ghosts, or cursed souls, known as the Seven Hunters. In these tales, a group of 7 hunters committed a sin here in ancient times or fell victim to a curse. After their deaths, their spirits haunted the island at certain intervals or when a specific sign appeared, for example, an extreme storm or holy days. These spirits would demand a living sacrifice from anyone present on the island. According to this theory, the 3 keepers who vanished in 1900 were the taken sacrifices. The absence of any trace meant that not their bodies, but their souls had been claimed. Before Christianity, Scotland held the belief that nature was filled with spirits. Certain places were forbidden or sacred, and that islands could have guardians, keepers, or ghosts. The Flannan Isles were considered one of these sacred places. Notably, there was a chapel dedicated to Saint Flannan. Priests and locals would not go to the island in ordinary clothing. They wore ceremonial garments and walked with their heads bowed, stemming from the belief that disrespecting the island would bring a curse. This atmosphere made the island a kind of spirit gate, or cursed threshold. In short, according to the Ghosts of the Seven Hunters theory, spiritual entities were sleeping or waiting on the Flannan Isles. These beings were disturbed once a year, triggered by some event. In the winter of 1900, during the keeper's tenure, this hidden cycle began again. The light of the lighthouse broke the silence of these spirits because the light pierced the island's sanctity. The three keepers paid the price for this disturbance. They were taken as sacrifices. Another paranormal theory is the phantom ship theory. Among local seafarers, there are legends of ghostly ships that do not truly exist. These phantom vessels are said to be transports to the realm of the dead, similar to Naglfar in Viking mythology. According to paranormal accounts, the keepers saw such a ship on the horizon after a storm and went outside to respond to what they thought was a call for help. In reality, the ship was a spiritual trap, deceiving the human eye and mind. Anyone who approached was taken to the other side. Some also claim the island was once a ritual site for a secret cult or occult group. Before the lighthouse was built, there were rock carvings, symbols, and stone arrangements in certain parts of the island. One or more of the keepers may have taken an interest in these symbols. Being in the wrong place at the wrong time, perhaps during a full moon or on a sacred date, could have awakened the entities or completed an ancient ritual. In this case, the three keepers would have been taken as ritual sacrifices. Were the keepers aware of something about this place? It is said that principal keeper James Ducat was uneasy before taking up his Flannan assignment and hugged his children as if saying goodbye. In 1990, his 98-year-old daughter, Anna Ducat, told the Times that she remembered her father's reluctance to accept the post. He said it was too dangerous, that he had a wife and 4 children depending on him, but Mr. Muirhead, Robert Muirhead, the superintendent, persuaded him because he had such faith in him as a good and reliable keeper.
My brother and I were playing out in the garden, and we looked up and it was my father coming out. He was going back from his leave, and he walked up the garden and lifted both of us and kissed us and walked away, shut the gate. And we stood and looked after him a minute or two, watched him walking up the road. We lived in a house right at the sea. The sea was just across from us. And we ran after him shouting, "Daddy, Daddy." And he turned at the very corner, and walked slowly back, lifted us up again. So it looked as if he had some presentiment there was something going to happen. We never saw him again. That was the last time we saw him. The men from Edinburgh all came to see Mother. There were about 5 of them. And we were playing in the house at the time when the doorbell rang. When Mother opened the door, these men were all standing outside in the passageway, come with the news of the accident to tell them that Father and all the men were washed away.
In short, Anna recounted that before the Flannan assignment, her father had clearly told Northern Lighthouse Board Superintendent Robert Muirhead that this was a very dangerous posting. Ducat said he had a wife and 4 children depending on him. Nevertheless, Muirhead appointed him to the role, trusting his experience. What exactly did Ducat know about the island? Whatever happened to the keepers, it took place on December 15th, 1900, and the answer vanished with the waves of the Atlantic. They left behind countless questions that may never be answered. If the bodies were truly swept out to sea, why did none wash ashore? Why did one of the keepers leave the lighthouse without even taking his coat? How could 3 experienced lighthouse keepers be caught completely unprepared by an unexpected wave? Reports from nearby islands say the seas were calm. So why did the logbook describe a terrible storm striking them? No one knows what happened to them, and perhaps we never will. But what about you? Do you dare to uncover the truth? With Eilean Mor, the Lost Keepers, step into the atmosphere and investigate this mystery for yourself. Add the game to your Steam wishlist now.